Well, good morning. Welcome to Bible Study. So glad that you are here with us this morning as we participate in another day of PartyOn. We are walking through this week specifically the Jewish festivals. Now, there are several Jewish festivals, and I know that there are many out there who are more educated and knowledgeable on these festivals than I am. But what we're simply doing is looking at the text on these things to see what God's heart is. And it is clear that God's heart is built around a table and built around joy and built around food. And today we come to Leviticus chapter 3, which is the Festival of Firstfruits. Now, before we go into that, though, I want to remind you that all of this is made possible by the generous donors of ChristTable.today. And if you'd like to receive our Bible studies by mail, as well as all of our other materials regularly, then our regular donors of ChristTable.today get those for free. If you're not ready to do that, but just want to know more about us, go visit the website and maybe even sign up for the email so that you will be kept up to date on all of the happenings at Christ Table. And as always, I say this: if you are unable to financially participate, let me know, and we will still send you those materials so that you are able to have that with you as you walk through the Bible study. Now, today, as we look at the Bible study, it's quite an interesting passage because I have heard this text used many different times and in many different ways around tithing. And as I've read this passage, I think that there is something to that, but I think that it is so much more beautiful and complex than just being bound to a discussion of tithing. And so why don't we just go ahead and jump into Leviticus chapter 23 and this feast or festival of first fruits, which is quite a mouthful in the English. So Leviticus 23 verse 9, then the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. So this is not from Moses, this is from God. Moses is simply just the mouthpiece. So he's speaking, as we might say, prophetically, meaning he is speaking as the voice of God, as a prophet. When you enter the land I'm giving you, and you harvest its first crops, bring the priest a bundle of grain from the first cutting of your grain harvest. So now, first of all, I want to point out that they are not yet in the promised land. Okay, got that. So this is something that is both prophetic, meaning that it is coming from the voice of God, but it's also something that is prophetic, meaning that it is looking forward into the future. And so they're in the middle of a desert wasteland right now whenever this command is given. So they're not actually able to fulfill it. But God is saying whenever the promise is fulfilled of you having land, and you being able to farm that land for food, for grains, I want you to, when you first begin harvesting this first crop in this new land, this land of promise that I'm giving you, I want you to bring to the priest a bundle of that first cutting. Now, traditionally, what would happen is some crops. Growing up in the Midwest, I have an insane amount of inane knowledge. Oftentimes, what they would do is they would cut the best first, and then they would kind of move around, and the second best, the third best, the fourth best, and then it would get distributed out by then. So the best would be sold first. Second best would be sold second, and then they would work their way down through what was left, and supply and demand. People were more willing to buy second grade or third grade quality grain if there was none other left anywhere, and so they continued to be able to sell and turn a profit, give away all of those things. But as probably is still custom today, what would happen is the leftovers would go to God. So if God just simply said, I want you to bring to the priest some of your grain, well, we're going to sell what's best and keep what's better for us. And yeah, God, we'll give you that grain didn't grow well. It was in an area of the land that just the soil wasn't as rich, and I'll just simply fulfill my duty. God says specifically, this isn't just about fulfilling a duty. This is the way in which you fulfill the duty. I want your best. Why? Why does God intentionally tell them, I want your best and I want your first? Let's keep reading. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest will lift it up before the Lord so it may be accepted on your behalf. On that same day, you must sacrifice a 1-year-old male lamb with no defects as a burnt offering to God. With it, you must present a grain offering consisting of 4 quarts of choice flour moistened with olive oil, and it will be a special gift, a pleasing aroma to God. Apparently, God has a sense of smell. Now, in the midst of all these offerings, I want to say that this festival was a part of the regular routine of festivals. In fact, it says here, you must also offer 1 quart of wine as a liquid offering. Do not eat any bread or roasted grain or fresh kernels on that day until you bring this offering to your God. So show up hungry. This is a permanent law for you. It must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live. And so there are 2 things that we see in these festivals or these feasts that are here. And the first thing that we see is that there is always an assembly attached. An assembly meaning like a convocation, a calling together of all of the people is always a part of this. So that's always a part of all of these Jewish festivals. And the other thing that is also always a part of these Jewish festivals is that they are attached to a feast, to food. And so there would be eating that took place as a part of this festival. Now, what we see here is that it is one that is to continue permanently. So each and every year at the harvest time, when the grain was harvested, they were to enact and to do this. Now, fast forward from when it was given to the desert to when they entered the promised land, and they began fulfilling this festival, and they did so as a permanent law year after year after year after year, so much so that it's still in practice whenever Jesus arrives on the scene in the New Testament. By that point, though, it ended up being essentially 2 days after Passover. So people would show up in Jerusalem in order to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we've talked about, as well as Passover, which we talked about, and then they would stay in town many times so that they could also participate in this feast 2 days after Passover, which is the Feast of Firstfruits. Now, interestingly enough, the way they did it fell on the Sunday after Passover. What happened on the Sunday after Passover? Well, historically, the Sunday after Passover is the resurrection of Jesus on the day of the Feast of Firstfruits. There are no coincidences. So, firstfruits. A couple of things. First of all, this. What do we do with the resources that God has given to us? What do you do with the resources that God has given to you? One of the things that we find in the Old Testament is a tremendous amount of intentionality, where God says, I don't just simply want you showing up for an hour on Sunday, or in their case, an hour on Friday evening, and feeling as though you have done the extent of what you need to do to be a person of faith, to be a follower of mine. This is a 24/7 365 life. Now, when you read it, that clearly doesn't mean that you're in a place of worship 24/7, 365, but I think that it does mean that you are in a spirit of worship 24/7, 365, where you understand that these principles and this faith and this life that you are a part of with God affects needfully every single area in your life and every single thing about you. And so in this God-directed life, there can be no compartmentalization. There can be no silos of the heart or silos of the mind or silos of our practice. We're either all in 100%, all of our chips are on the table, or if we're holding some back, then the Bible says that that's not true faith. So that means that all of your resources are an opportunity for you to either practice this God-directed life, or all of your resources are an opportunity to prove to the world that I'm a hypocrite, that you're a hypocrite. Because if you're only half in, but you're kind of pretending that you're in this God spirit life, the word for that is hypocrite. I get it. It's tough. Even for me, even today, having been on the journey and on the road for decades, I still struggle. It's a daily decision to be all in. And even today, I still sometimes leave some chips on the table for me. But the expectation here, the goal here, the standard is that all of our resources, everything that we have, is to view those things as having been given to us by God. And when we view those things, the things that we earn, the gifts that we have been given, the blessings that are a part of our life, even the struggles that are a part of our life, if we view everything in our life as an opportunity to see it as coming from the hand of God who loves us and who cares for us, then it changes the way that we utilize it. Whenever I give my kids a gift, it's much different than something, right, that they just found on the street corner. You know, they find a toy on the side of the road. They're going to treat that toy differently than a toy that dad gave to them, because there's meaning attached to it now. And whenever you understand that God has given you all of the resources that you have in your life, now there's meaning attached to those things, and it changes the way we utilize them. So what do you do with the resources that God has given you? And it's not just money. That's why I said tithing. I think it's appropriate to see this passage of first fruits through that lens. But what about your time? What about the skill set that you have that you're good at? What about all of the knowledge that you have acquired? What about all of the training and the certifications and the education? What about the education that you've received at the School of Hard Knocks, through experience? What about your home? It's a resource. Your bank account certainly is. Much to the point of this study, your table. Your table is a resource as well. What do you do with that resource? What if you saw your dining room table? What if you saw your kitchen as being a resource that God has given you? How might that change the way that you view it? And how might that change the way that you utilize it? You see, it's easy to have this conversation about money. It's a little more difficult to have that conversation about other things, because it causes us to pause and say, oh, I'm not sure I thought about that in quite that way. And so God asks for the first and the best here in Leviticus. And he asks them to do it as a part of a party. the feast or the festival, the first fruits. And he asked for it without hesitation. Why? I think there's a part of it that says there's a mindset. If we start by giving our first and our best away, then it sets precedent for the rest of the crop. If we begin with a spirit or an attitude of giving, then we'll end with a spirit and attitude of giving. Giving is catching. Now, sometimes you may say, yeah, but I don't want to. I'll do it, but I don't want to. Some people would say, well, if you're not in the right heart attitude, then don't do it. I'm not sure that's true. There's some things that we do just because we're supposed to do it, whether or not we feel like it. Sometimes feelings come second and obedience comes first. My kids, they don't always want to obey the things that I've commanded them or asked them to do, but they do it. And eventually they understand or they see the benefit or the value in doing it. I'm not asking them to do anything crazy or harmful. I'm asking them to do things that are helpful, but they can't see yet the helpfulness of it. I think it works that way with God as well, too. Whether it's tithing, whether it's giving our first and our best of our time to God, whether it's using our table and giving away things to others that perhaps we would initially keep for ourselves. I think sometimes whenever we follow God's directions on these things, we don't necessarily feel like doing it or see the benefit or the value. And that only comes oftentimes in the doing, in the repetitive doing of it. And so if you don't always feel like giving your first and your best to God, I think that's okay. That just means you're human. But don't let it stop you from doing it. God so oftentimes in this book says, try me. Test me. Live it this way and see for yourself. Almost as if to say, if you discover it's a lie and it's wrong and I'm not a person of my word and my promises, then don't do it anymore. But at least give me the chance. Are you giving God your first fruits? The first and the best of all of you and all of your resources? And if not, are you willing to give him a chance? And see what happens when you do. Until tomorrow, party on.